Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Way Forward Leader Lunch Break. We're pleased today to welcome Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, straight from her courtroom in downtown Cleveland. Judge Russo began serving the people of Cuyahoga County as a judge on the Court of Common Pleas in 1997. She has long had an interest in enabling the incarcerated to successfully transition back into community at the end of their prison terms. She took the helm of Reentry Court and has successfully managed that docket. Under her leadership, she has seen a 92% success rate in successfully reintegrating participants back into the community, saving taxpayers about $1 million in prison housing costs, and positioning these individuals to become taxpayers themselves. Judge Russo docket came to a screeching halt when the pandemic hit, but she rose to the challenge and began making personal phone calls every day to be certain that the individuals under her charge continued to feel supported in their journeys toward reintegration. She has received a number of awards in her career, and I'm only going to mention a few because I think they reflect the partnerships that she has forged and what she stands for. She's been recognized as Judge of the Year by Parents of Murdered Children, Judge of the Year by Mothers Against Drunk Drivers, Community Partner Award from the Adams Board, that's the Alcohol, Drug Addiction, and Mental Health Services Board of Cuyahoga County. She's been recognized by the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Correction as an outstanding partner. And we recognize her as an alum of our Leadership Cleveland class of 2000 and of our Advanced Leadership Institute of 2020. Judge Russo, thank you for making time to be with us today.
Thank you. Hi, everybody, and thanks for having an interest in reentry. That makes my day. So I often tell the people in Reentry Court, and you can imagine, since we all know what goes on and the crime and the poverty and the challenges that people face, that sometimes the only reason I get out of bed is for Reentry Court, because that's the part of my day that gives me hope. And I appreciate anybody that's interested in reentry. The more people in the community that are interested, the more successful all those people can be. So Reentry Court started kind of in a strange way. We received a grant. It came through George Bush's administration to the federal court, and the federal court wasn't ready to do it. So they asked us to take the money, and we did. It was originally a $50,000 grant, and we took it and we created something out of nothing. The initial discussions I had once I was selected to preside over the docket was to meet with different stakeholders, police departments, prosecutors, public defenders, private defense bar, different types of people in the community, nonprofits and things, to get a feel for what people were hoping would happen. And the goal everybody had was to reintegrate people coming home from prison in a positive way so that we could reduce recidivism, not only for them, but to stop this cycle of prison that we all know happens in families. There's a high likelihood if a parent's been in prison that a child may end up in prison. So we wanted to not just help that person, but to look down the road into the future and build stronger families, which builds stronger neighborhoods and communities. So that's what we did. It took us a while to get on our feet because this had never been done. So we started baby steps. I'm pretty conservative in how I want to start a program, because I knew at any minute if something went wrong, my funding would be taken away. So anybody who works in anything with grants knows they're watching your measures and they're seeing how you're doing. So I wanted to start and test some different things out. So we did. And at the beginning, we didn't take any kind of violent crime. We didn't take anything that had a gun involved in it. And then as we progressed and we started to understand what we could do to help and what was working, we gradually expanded the program. Today, as we sit here, 13, almost 14 years into the program, I will take anybody into Reentry Court that's eligible under the law for judicial release, except somebody with a contact sex offense. So if it's a rape, a GSI, or a battery, we don't take those into the program. It's a different kind of supervision. And also we do have a lot of interaction among our clients together. So I want a high level of comfort for the person that's in the program and for the other people in the program. So I decided that in an abundance of caution that that would not be a supervision that we wanted to undertake. But we do take felonious assaults with gun specifications. We do take involuntary manslaughter. We do take any kind of drug case. It's not a mandatory drug. We do take nonviolent things, of course. But I think what's most interesting about Reentry Court is we're not a first offender program. So we take people up to their sixth prison term. I'm sorry, their seventh prison term. They can have 6 prior prison terms. Well, if you've been in prison 6 times, you probably had some probations in there as well. So you can tell that we're not dealing with a pristine population in the sense of no experience. We are sometimes dealing with people that have been in the criminal justice system from an early age. We also will take you into the program if you have 2 current cases for which you're incarcerated, but not 3. And these are criteria we've developed as we've gone along. So how do we do this? Well, one thing that I do pre-pandemic, and I'm happy to say I'm getting ready to start again in April, is I teach in the prisons. I teach a class at Grafton, and I also teach a class at Northeast. But in addition to the classes, I regularly go into the prisons that take Northeast Ohio prisoners, and I do seminars about reentry. I tell them about Reentry Court, how to apply for it, what the services are, what we do, what our results are. And by doing that and going into the prisons, what I learned was many things. I learned, first of all, that in having conversations, even in groups with people in the prisons, there's a lot of conversation and communication back and forth. So even if somebody turns out to not be eligible, let's say they're on a mandatory sentence or they're from another county, I still have that opportunity because I'm there to answer questions as a judge, to stand there and answer questions that they might have and clear up some confusion that they might have about a particular part of their journal entry, or why, explain to them why they're not eligible, or give them direction if they're from another county. You can file this motion with your judge. You need to do that with this judge in this county. So it's been interesting because it's very much I'm customer service oriented. And for me, this is a very customer service thing for me to do, to be able to go in the prisons. And in addition, I've developed good relationships with the case managers. That's helped because the case managers, because they know about Reentry Court, sometimes they'll identify prisoners that they think, oh, this would be a good candidate for the program. I'm going to urge them to apply. And they do have all the applications in the prisons. Every prison in Ohio has my applications. And the case managers will even sometimes write recommendations for people. Get questions from particular interest in a defendant who feel they've done particularly well. Even wardens have contacted me and said, look, I think this person's really worth a look, even though the record looks bad. I'm going to tell you why I would support it. So what I think that most people don't realize is there's many people in our criminal justice system that are very focused on reentry. We do the quiet work. I always tell people we're not the sexy work. People pay attention to drug courts, they pay attention to mental health courts, those kinds of things, which are very important. But I think because we're a post-conviction docket, we don't get a lot of attention. And people think, well, if there's no talk about it, doesn't mean it's going on. But it's a very active part of the criminal justice system. And our partners are people in the nonprofit sector, the criminal justice system, the rehabilitation system. And that encourages me because I meet people at every level of the spectrum in the system that are really committed to trying to make things better. So the perception that some people have of is, oh, warden doesn't care about somebody doing better when they get out, really isn't true. And Ohio's tier system, I don't know if you're familiar with this, but Ohio went to a tier, TIER system, which means that in the old days, let's say you had a felony 2 with a gun, they would automatically send you to a high security prison because of the gun and the offense. Excuse me. So now what they do is, instead of that, people go through an evaluation when they go to the holding center. So for example, the men from Cuyahoga County all go to Lorraine Correctional. They get an interview there. They have an ORAS assessment there. And from there, they try to figure out what's the best placement for this person. If they have a violent history and they get sent to one of the higher level prisons, those people still have the opportunity to work their way down to a reintegration center through programming and good behavior. That's a revolutionary kind of idea, because what it did was, first of all, it helped isolate the most violent prisoners with the most violent prisoners, which afforded ODRC the ability to properly staff those prisons to protect COs and to protect other prisoners. And they do have programming, but it's not as free. They don't walk the yards, things like that. It also gave somebody who had a violent crime the ability to get out of that environment and go into a reintegration facility where they might get skills training. They can go out in the yard. There's other kinds of programming. And that is a form of reentry within the prisons, that kind of tiering. So many prisons in many states have gang problems, which we've all heard anecdotally, but believe me, it's real. It's very real. So when I'm looking at institutional summaries, I know that if I'm looking at somebody at Toledo or Lebanon, 99.99% of the time, they're never going to get into my court, because I can look at that institutional summary and I see security threat group, fighting, heartless felons, gangster disciples. It's all there, because those are the prisons they go to. But when I get something from Grafton, or I get something from Richland, even Lake Erie Correctional, I know now these people are in step down units. So even though the crime might look bad on its face, I can go into that institutional summary and find that they're taking programming, that they've worked their security level down. So if they start at Lorraine and they go, for example, to Mansfield, which is a higher level, and then they go to Richland, and then they go to Grafton, then I can see they're already making progress while they're incarcerated. And that gives me a good indication of somebody that really wants to do better, because they're working on it from inside the wall. And that's really important. I think we can all appreciate that it must be difficult to have any hope when you're in prison. But when you go in the prisons, you would be so uplifted. I know that sounds strange, but you would be so uplifted and hopeful when you talk to the men and women that are there about the insight they have into their own lives and mistakes, what their goals are, and how they're trying to get better. And I've heard more times than I can count, Judge, it was good I went to prison. It saved my life. I wouldn't be here if I hadn't gone to prison. And I think sometimes the general public thinks of prison only as punitive, and it is a form of punishment, obviously, but it's also designed to rehabilitate. And sometimes in the conversation, we lose sight of the fact that for some people, prison is the first place they get an education, which is terrible because it's essentially become the new high schools and colleges. It is the first place people become interested in a skill. It's the first place some people get sober. So as bad as it is to be there, for some people, it truly has been a lifeline. And then for others, particularly those that come through Reentry Court, not only has it been a lifeline, but I see them come out and do amazing things. I have several graduates who now have contracts with ODRC, and they're doing programming for inmates. So imagine that somebody went to prison for a crime, came out, did my program, finished my program completely, successfully, and then went out and built a nonprofit to reach back and help other prisoners, and got a contract from the very Department of Corrections that incarcerated them. You know, those are amazing stories. And to see those partnerships develop are wonderful, because every time someone with a record goes to work and does a good job, or does a nonprofit and gets a contract, the people who come in contact with them now, they're forced to change their perception of what they think a formerly incarcerated person is. So I always call the people in Reentry Court my ambassadors. They're really my ambassadors. They do more to educate the public and employers and people in government about what it takes to be successful after incarceration than anything I can do, or anything that anybody can do that hasn't been in prison. And I think it's really just so critical that we always respect that experience, and that when we're talking about changes to criminal justice, that we consult the people that have had the experience. there seems to be, from where I sit, an awful lot of people talking about change in criminal justice that are not really talking about, no, sorry, not talking to the people that are in criminal justice. They don't talk to us much as judges. They like to talk about us, but they don't talk to us too often. And they really don't talk to the people that have been in prison. And that's really missing the mark. I'm very candid. Anybody who knows me knows that I'm pretty candid. And there's no secrets with me. I'm totally transparent. And I have been a critic of a lot of the discussions about criminal justice reform in quotations. Why? Well, I hear a lot of people spending a lot of time talking about bail. Well, the bail system has been in effect for a long period of time, and we have criteria for bail. Bail is pretrial. I don't hear anybody talking about post-conviction. What are we going to do about post-conviction? What are we going to do to ensure that there's adequate programming in every prison? What are we going to do to ensure that there's adequate visitation in every prison? That when people can't travel to visit a loved one, that they have all kinds of technology available to them to help them visit. What are we going to do about encouraging the bond between a child and a parent in prison so that when the parent comes home, that the child feels secure and not always afraid the parent's going to go away again, and you build that relationship back. We tend to just think of the reform concept of just stopping here in my courtroom. And for me, first of all, the courts are the end of the line of a system that's failed in many places. It may have failed in the educational system because I rarely see people in the system that are well educated. It fails in the opportunity sector. It fails in the economic security sector. And then we have to deal with the fallout. That's where we are. We're the last stop on that train, so to speak. So now they're going to leave my room and go to prison. For me, my room is the end of one series of failures, where now we have to deal with the consequences of all those failures. But it's the beginning of a new process. So for me, reentry begins the moment the person gets sentenced to prison. That's the moment that the person has to start thinking about coming home, and that their lawyers should be trained to teach them about coming home, and their family should understand what's available about them coming home. And that process should begin immediately, because as we know, most people do come home from prison. There are some, obviously, that are never going to come home, but it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have programming, and it doesn't mean that they shouldn't have as full a life as you can have. Even though you've committed a heinous crime, you're still a human being. You deserve to be treated well. You deserve to be fed. You deserve health care. You deserve to have some kind of thing to do with your mind, because we can continually isolate people, but that's not going to solve any long-term problem. And on a one-to-one basis, to me, it's just immoral to not treat a human being with the basic needs of humanity. You don't have to approve of the behavior, but it's hate the sin, not the sinner, so to speak. So I would like to see more people talking about reentry, thinking about reentry, the community thinking about reentry. And I appreciate all the awards I've gotten over the years. And one of the things I'm very proud of is I've gotten awards from both victims advocacy groups and from incarcerated families advocacy groups. But the one that I love the most, which I think surprises a lot of people when I tell them this, is that I got the Coretta Scott King Award from the NAACP branch in prison. And for me, that was just a huge moment, because some of the men that gave me that award, I sent there. I actually sentenced them. And to hear them thank me for the work in reentry and honor me with that award. I mean, Coretta Scott King, she's just an amazing woman. And her husband was an amazing man. And for the NAACP branch in a prison to do that meant the world to me. And people go, well, yeah, but you got that from a bunch of inmates. But for me, that's the most meaningful one. Because as a judge, it's telling me that they understand that I still believe in them. I've had to do my job and I've done my job, but I believe in them. And that's important, that people always have hope. I've always said the most dangerous people in the world are those without any hope. If you can give hope to someone, you can help them. Hope and help are essentially the same thing. And reentry is really about that. We do have great statistics. We have a 92% success rate. We've saved the state over $1 million a year for every year we've been in existence, except for probably the pandemic year. We did take people out during the pandemic. They did come into Reentry Court. It was tough. God bless them. They came out in the middle of the pandemic in March and April, had to quarantine, couldn't report in person, which was very scary to me because we have a very hands-on kind of supervision. It's very collaborative and we're always talking to each other and they're part of the process. We don't just tell them what to do. We create case plans with them. And I was scared because I thought, my God, they're coming out of prison. One guy had been in 23 years and I let him out in April of last year. So imagine, he didn't know what a cell phone was. And there's a pandemic. It was craziness. It was, and I thought, I am losing my mind. But his warden, interestingly enough, said, Judge, this guy deserves to get out. And I thought, well, if the warden's willing to tell me that, and the warden had him working outside the yard, had him driving the warden around to meetings and things, I said, okay, I trust you. He's been stellar. No violations, done perfectly well, got a job within 30 days, totally turned his life around. So you think about letting people out in the pandemic, how hard that was. But we did it. We couldn't do as much of it because I couldn't go into the prisons to help me identify people or engage them and telling them what we were doing. But we did let, I think, 4 or 5 people out, and they've all done really well. So the money savings is great, but it's interesting because for years we lived on that $50,000 a year grant. And 2-3 years ago, the court forwent the grant from the county because it went from the feds to the county. And we just brought it under the umbrella of the court's budget. And our budget's still pretty small. We have 1 probation officer and we have 1 processor, and they get salaries that are specifically dedicated to reentry. And then my bailiff and I do the extra work as part of the work we already do. So consider that we've been able to do on a $50,000 a year budget, over $1 million a year in savings to the state. And that savings is calculating the bed rate of the prison, the per diem. It doesn't include medical that's been saved, and it doesn't include post-release control, which is a form of parole, supervision, which they save as well. So I'm very proud of the numbers, but that's really, I think, because of the people in the program. They're really motivated. They're excited to be in this program. I hope if you ever have an interest, you can always come to one of my groups. I invite all of you to come to group if you want. We have it the 3rd Thursday of every month at 1 o'clock. It's where all the clients come in together. I bring in motivational speakers for them or speakers on topics they have an interest in. And we all meet together, and you're welcome to come. And I think if you could talk to the people that are in the program and some of the alumni, that you would feel the same spark that I do to really go out and focus on this part of reentry and coming up with creative ways, because we can always come up with something new and something improved to help support those people. So for the people that can't come into my program, which are many, and certainly nobody outside Cuyahoga County, to create that umbrella of support and hope for people that they can come home, and whatever time in prison they did, that's the last time they did. Now let's focus on what you want to do. And in my classes at the prisons, that's really what we talk about. We have a very philosophical kind of a class. It's not textbooks, it's conversation. And we talk about the fact that prison is the first time that some of these people have ever had the opportunity to just think, to not constantly be running or looking for a drug or trying to do this or trying to that or trying to get money for a family member. You know, from that, it's like stillness. It's like a very serious adult timeout. And they take the time to think about, wow, what do I want to do with my life? And I've seen so many of them come out with amazing skills, just amazing skills that they never would have thought to even have an interest in, let alone study. And I do want to give a shout out to Ashland University. I don't know if you're aware of this, but they provide a tremendous amount of education in the prisons. And there's a number of people in prison who are getting college degrees through Ashland. And I've never met with the people at Ashland, but I hear about them all the time, and I've seen the real results that they get. And we should support that as well. Universities and community colleges that are willing to go in and help people get degrees. That's important. So that's the basis of Reentry Court, kind of the philosophy of what we're doing. And I could talk for hours about it, but I won't. And I know you have some questions, so let me know.
Great, Judge Russo, thank you so much. We have had a couple questions come in. The first, you had mentioned bail, and there's a question around your thoughts on the bail bond program and how you feel about that program.
Well, I actually support more surety bonds, bail bonds. Why is that? Well, because bail bonds are a form of insurance. If a person is charged with a crime and they don't show up to court and they have a personal bond or they have a 10% bond, the reality is that there's nobody to go find them. And there's a high incidence when people go capious of them committing other crimes. So there's a risk to the community. And bail is a two-pronged evaluation for a judge. It's protection of the public and appearance of the defendant. It's not one or the other. So the court's always balancing that. So I think particularly for violent crimes, a bondsman is a much better choice. If the person, let's say somebody's accused of a carjacking with a gun, it's a violent crime, and they get a 10% bond. If they just disappear from the jurisdiction, nobody's going to go look for them. The sheriffs don't have the personnel to find them. And what happens often is they get stopped on a traffic stop and something horrible happens to them or the police officer, because the policeman doesn't know he has an open warrant, but the person knows he has an open warrant. The person assumes the policeman knows he has an open warrant, and things just go bad. That's one of the most dangerous things for police officers is traffic stops, and that's why. A bondsman sends out their own people to find them, because if the person isn't found, the bondsman loses money. So what happens too is it engages from the very beginning the family with the defendant, because they're usually they know who the mom is, they can reach the person, and people are brought in by bondsmen, in my experience here, peacefully. There's not a problem. And they're brought in before they've committed another crime. Sometimes it's just, they went somewhere they shouldn't have gone. The bondsman calls them and goes, hey, you missed court, and the person comes into court. So I think we have to balance. You have to have an understanding of the bail system to try to improve it. Everything can have an improvement, but I do think that there are some crimes that you absolutely should have that kind of surety involved for the safety of the public as well as for, and it costs about the same. People have that misperception too. A 10% bond with the clerk's fee, let's say it's a $5,000 10% bond, will cost almost the exact same amount of money, if not the same amount of money, as a $5,000 cash surety property bond, because the bondsman doesn't take the whole 5,000, they take a percentage of it.
Judge Russo, as you look out into the community, what nonprofits or organizations do you collaborate with?
Well, I am a big fan of Edwin's, and Edwin's is a culinary institute that is on Shaker Square. And Brandon Krostowski and I have been friends for many years. He actually came to a mutual friend with the idea of Edwin's, who came to me, and I introduced him to the people at ODRC that I was working with in reentry, and he was able to start from there. So he and I have been together almost from the beginning of both of our programs. We were just a little bit ahead of Edwin's, and we've done a lot of work together. We have worked on the Faith Summit together, the Business Summit together. I work also with the nonprofit started by my alumni. So I have a man who was in my program named Andrew Hackett. I had sentenced him to 10 years. I think it was 10 years or 15 years of bank robbery. And he did really well in prison. I let him out on judicial release after he'd served the minimum time. He came out. He had a passion for fatherhood projects, and he developed a nonprofit to help men in prison coming home to get their driver's licenses back so that they could work and pay their child support, and also parenting classes. And he also got a contract with ODRC to do the same thing. So I have referred our current clients to Andrew's nonprofit. And then there's other nonprofits the court contracts with that we do send out for services sometimes. Occasionally we'll use towards employment. Ohio Means Jobs, we've had them come in and speak. But I would say, for most of them, it's the nonprofits the court coordinates with, other than, for example, Edwin's. But I have to say that I think there's a lot of nonprofits in this county that are not getting contracts that deserve more recognition. There's been a pattern, I find, that the same people are getting the contracts every single year. And there's not a lot of requirements for them to show success. It's almost like the county's fallen into the habit of just giving the money to the same people over and over, regardless of what they're producing. So I would like to see the county council and administration become more aggressive in demanding results and demanding that they show that they're making a difference, because they're getting millions and millions of dollars. And the small nonprofits, started perhaps by people formerly incarcerated. There's a group on the east side, Circle for Recovery, that's all men that have been in prison who want to mentor younger men coming out of prison. They've been doing it for 15 years. They're highly successful. They're very under the radar. And every time they try to get a contract from the county, basically they get washed over. And I think that we need to refocus where we're giving the taxpayer money. There's a lot of, small mom and pop nonprofits out there that are doing amazing work on the ground, in the community work, that we could do a better job.
Judge Russo, we have hit our time. We do have some more questions that I'm going to share as a follow-up in hopes that we might be able to then share those with the attendees on the call today. But we are so appreciative of all of the work that you are doing for the community and your advocacy for this population, and look forward to how we can continue to support you and your work. With that, I'm going to turn it back to Mary Ann.
Thanks so much, Rachel. Judge Russo, that was fabulous. Your passion just penetrates right through the screen, and we're grateful for all that you're doing. I would note that Judge Russo does this in addition to managing her regular docket. So this is additive to her work. And thank you for the difference that you're making.